Welcome to Crushed Husband. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. The rain had been coming down since before sunset, a steady cold sheet that blurred the streetlights into hazy gold orbs. I'd just locked the shop and was halfway up the narrow stairs to my apartment when I spotted her, standing in the glow of my front window, hair plastered to her face, wrestling with the bulk of an antique grandfather clock. She was losing. The thing was taller than she was, wrapped in a wet blanket that clung like seaweed. Her right hand was gripping the neck of it, left shoulder braced against the glass of my door. One slip, and it was going to crash to the sidewalk. I pulled my keys from my pocket. Careful, those weigh more than they look. She startled, eyes flashing up to mine like she hadn't noticed me watching. It's already broken, she said, breathless. What's the worst that can happen? The clock shifted and she cursed under her breath. I crossed the last few steps and unlocked the door. The warm smell of oiled wood and brass gears drifted out. Inside, I said, pushing the door open. Before you drown. She hesitated. You're closed. I glanced at the rain running off her coat in rivulets. So is the sky. Doesn't seem to care. That got the faintest twitch of a smile. She edged the clock over the threshold, and I caught the base before it could slam into the floor. Together, we maneuvered it into the shop, setting it gently on its back across two work tables. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the blanket. It hasn't run in years, she said, but tonight the chime started making this awful noise. Then it just stopped. I nodded, running my fingers along the worn oak case. The brass pendulum was still, the escapement jammed hard. Storm probably rattled something loose, I murmured. You're lucky it didn't tip. She was dripping all over the floor, a small puddle forming at her boots. I live above a bar, I added, heading toward the counter for a rag. If you don't mind noise, I can look at it now. Her brow furrowed. You live here? Upstairs. Perks of being your own landlord. I tossed her the rag. Luke Anders, watchmaker. She caught it, squeezing water from her sleeves. Anna, she said after a beat, as if testing whether to give her name at all. I nodded once and turned back to the clock. My father's words came to mind, the ones that had steered my hands through 1,000 tiny repairs. Restore what can be saved. Let go of what can't. Brass and steel were simple, people less so. Still, I found myself saying, if you've got a few minutes, I can tell you what's wrong. Her eyes flicked to the rain, hammering the window, then back to me. I've got time, she said. I pulled a stool closer. The storm rattled the glass, the bar below thumped with muffled bass, and the old clock lay open between us, its heart waiting for someone to bring it back to life. The rain was still coming down hard enough to rattle the shop windows, so I hung my coat back up and waved her toward the little counter in the corner. Sit. You're making a lake on my floor, I said. She gave me a half smile, more polite than amused, and slid onto the stool. Her coat made a wet slap against the seat. I can't promise much, but I can make tea, I added, heading for the electric kettle. That's fine, she said, looking around at the rows of clocks like she'd just stepped into another century. Anything warm is fine. While the water heated, I pulled the tall work lamp over the clock's open case. The oak had taken on that dull, tired sheen wood gets after years in a damp attic. The brass gears were frozen mid-step, a film of dust caked along the teeth. How long's it been out of commission? I asked. She blew out a breath. Since before I moved back. It was my grandparents'. Sat in storage until last week. I thought it would be nice to have it in the house again. And then? It started groaning like it was in pain. Then it quit. The kettle clicked off. I poured hot water over 2 tea bags, slid one across to her, and set mine down by the tools. Could be worse, I said, pulling a loop over my eye. If the spring had gone, you'd have heard it. She leaned forward, chin propped on her hand. You talk about them like they're alive. They are, just don't breathe. I tilted the pendulum free and turned the escapement wheel with my thumb. It barely budged. Here's your problem. Broken escapement. That's what regulates the tick. Without it, you've just got a big, heavy statue. She sipped her tea. How much to fix it? I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because I was watching her eyes. Tired, guarded, but still curious. Normally, a couple hundred. She nodded slowly like she was deciding whether it was worth the trouble. Or, I said, leaning back, you could pay me in pie. That got a real smile out of her. Pie? Preferably homemade, preferably pecan. But I'm flexible. Her eyebrows went up. That's not much of a business model. It keeps the lights on, sometimes. She laughed under her breath and set her cup down. Fine, pie it is, though I make a better apple. I'll take my chances. I began rewrapping the clock in its damp blanket, careful not to let the wood touch the wet spots. Leave it here. I'll have it running by the end of the week. She slid off the stool, pulling her hood back up. You're trusting me to actually come back? You don't strike me as the type to stiff a guy over dessert. Her eyes lingered on me for a second, like she was weighing whether to answer that. Then she just said, "We'll see," and stepped into the rain. The door shut behind her, leaving the smell of wet wool and black tea in the air. The shop was quiet again, except for the faint, stubborn groan of gears waiting to move. She showed up the next afternoon, the bell over the door cutting through the steady tick of the shop. In her hands, balanced like it was worth more than gold, was a covered pie tin, a paper tray of takeout coffee hooked over one wrist. "You work fast," she said, eyeing the grandfather clock now standing proud against the wall, its pendulum swinging like it had never stopped. I wiped my hands on a rag. "You brought payment. I wasn't going to make you wait a week." She stepped closer, studying the case. "It looks better than I remember. You did something to the wood?" "Cleaned and re-oiled it. Gear train spotless, escapement replaced. She'll keep perfect time now." I watched her reach out, fingertips brushing the brass dial like she was afraid it might vanish. "Feels different," she murmured. "That's because it's alive again," I said, before I could think better of it. She gave me a small, sidelong smile. "You really believe that, don't you? Clocks lie dead until someone cares enough to fix them." I nodded toward the counter. "Pie?" We sat opposite each other at the small table by the window, the rain having downgraded to a gray drizzle outside. She cut the first slice, slid it to me without asking. "Pecan and still warm." "So," I said between bites, "what's the story behind this thing?" She set her fork down. "It was my grandmother's, stood in her hallway my whole childhood. My mom didn't want it when she passed, so it ended up in storage. I only took it out after I moved back." I sipped the coffee. "Where from?" "Chicago. Lived there 10 years. Her voice dipped. "Came back after my husband died. 3 years ago." I let the silence stretch just enough to let her steer away if she wanted. She didn't. "He was a good man," she said, eyes fixed on the coffee. "Heart attack. No warning." I set my fork down. "I'm sorry." She gave a small shrug, like she'd worn out the words for grief and had nothing left but muscle memory. "Anyway, I teach languages now, Spanish and French. It's quieter than I'm used to, but that's fine." "Quiet's underrated," I said. She looked up at me then, really looked. "Do you trust people easily, Luke?" It caught me off guard. "Not especially." "Same." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "But I think I trust people who fix things, not just toss them out when they break." I didn't have an answer for that, so I went back to the pie. When we'd finished, she stacked the plates and tucked the coffee cups into the trash. At the door, she hesitated. "I owe you dinner," she said. "Not as payment, just a thank you." "Tomorrow night?" My first instinct was to decline. Routine was easier than whatever this might be. But I heard myself say, "Sure." Her smile this time was lighter, unguarded. 7. "I'll cook." The bell over the door rang as she left, and the shop felt smaller without her in it. The clock in the corner kept perfect time. Her porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway, a warm square of yellow spilling across the wet boards. I could hear faint piano through the screen door. Something slow, deliberate. Anna met me at the entry with a dish towel in one hand. "You're right on time," she said. "I work with clocks," I replied, stepping into the smell of garlic and rosemary. Her place was exactly what I'd pictured, books stacked in columns against the walls, framed maps, a mix of mismatched chairs that somehow worked together. It was lived in, but not cluttered. Everything seemed to have been chosen for a reason. "Shoes off," she said, nodding at the mat. "I'm not fancy, but I draw the line at tracking mud through the kitchen." I kicked them off and followed her in. A pot simmered on the stove. The counter was covered with chopped vegetables, a loaf of bread, and an open bottle of wine. "Smells good," I said. "Chicken with white wine sauce." I figured it was hard to screw up. She poured me a glass and nodded toward the dining room. "You can sit, unless you're the type who can't stand watching someone else cook." I glanced toward the wide front window. The frame sagged just enough to catch my eye. "That window's sticking," I said. Her brow arched. You can tell from here? Old habit. I set the wine down and walked over, testing the sash. It groaned halfway up. Yeah, this track's swollen. You've got a plane or sandpaper? She gave me that look, half amused, half curious. I invite you for dinner and you start doing home repairs. Consider it an icebreaker. 10 minutes later, I had the thing sliding smooth again. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me work. You do realize you're setting a dangerous precedent, she said. I'm going to start pointing out everything that's broken. Long as you keep the wine flowing. We ate in the dining room, the piano now replaced by low classical from an old stereo. She poured sauce over the chicken and passed me the bread like we'd done it 100 times. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and the last bite of bread, the conversation shifted. My husband used to make this, she said suddenly. Different seasoning, but close enough that it feels familiar. I looked up from my plate. He was a composer, worked mostly from home, which meant there was always music in the house. One morning, he left for a walk and never came back. Heart stopped. Her voice didn't waver, but she kept her eyes on her fork. I didn't try to fill the air. After a moment, she glanced at me. What about you? You wear that ring mark like it's still there. Divorced, I said. 2 years now. She said I was married to my work. She wasn't wrong. I thought keeping the shop running was the way to keep us steady. Turns out, I was just giving her less and less reason to come home. The stereo track ended, leaving only the faint hum of the fridge. We took our drinks to the porch. The night air was cool and damp, the street quiet except for the occasional car passing. She sat with one leg tucked under her, staring out at the dark. I hate that it takes loss to make people see what matters, she said. Sometimes it's the only thing loud enough, I answered. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence wasn't empty, it was weighted, steady, like a clock in perfect rhythm. It started with the record player. She called one Saturday morning, her voice half laughing, half frustrated. It's stuck. I tried turning the platter by hand and now it just hums at me. I'll be there in 20, I said, already reaching for my toolbox. When I showed up, she had coffee ready and the player on the kitchen table like a patient waiting for surgery. It took me 10 minutes to unjam the tone arm. She sent me home with a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in foil. 2 days later, it was a squeaky floorboard by the hallway closet, then a loose cabinet hinge, a kitchen drawer that wouldn't close all the way. Each time she'd call, I'd show up, fix it, and somehow end up staying for a meal. It became a rhythm, her finding small things that needed attention, me showing up with tools and leaving with leftovers. There was never any rush. We'd eat, talk, sometimes say nothing at all, while a jazz station played in the background. One Thursday night, she was curled sideways in the armchair, reading. I'd just tightened the last screw on a wobbly shelf and was packing up when she asked, "Do you ever feel like you've forgotten how to belong to someone?" I looked up from the toolbox. Forgotten? Yeah. She shut the book without marking the page. Like you used to know, but it's gone. You can't remember the steps anymore. I thought about it. I think I was never taught. That made her pause. She nodded once, almost like she'd been expecting that answer. Maybe that's the problem. I set the toolbox down again. Or maybe it's not something you get taught. Maybe you just figure it out with the right person. Her eyes stayed on me a beat longer than usual. Then she stood, carried the book to the shelf I'd just fixed, and slid it into place. Neither of us said anything else. We just sat there, the radio low, the smell of her bread still warm in the air. I didn't leave until she started yawning, and even then, I walked out slow, tools in hand, thinking about how easily the rhythm had taken hold. By mid-December, the cold had teeth, the kind that chewed through coats and made the shop windows rattle. Anna called just after dark. "My furnace is dead," she said. "The repair guy can't come until Friday." "Then pack a bag," I told her. "You're staying here." "That's not—" "Anna," I cut in, already grabbing blankets from the closet. "You can either freeze in your house or sleep upstairs where the heat works. Your call." There was a pause, then, "Fine, but I'm taking the couch." When she showed up 20 minutes later, cheeks flushed from the wind, I had the couch piled with quilts like I was preparing for a siege. She dropped her overnight bag and smirked. "You act like I'm moving in." "Temporary measures," I said, "until the furnace is fixed." She made good on the couch threat, at least for a while. But sometime in the night, I woke to find her curled against me in bed, still wrapped in one of the quilts, her hair a dark spill on the pillow. I didn't move, just listened to her steady breathing until I fell asleep again. By the next morning, she was making coffee like she'd done it 100 times. We fell into an easy rhythm, eggs, toast, her laughing at the way I burned one side of the bacon. I found I didn't mind the sound of someone else in my kitchen. Over the next few days, the shop smelled faintly of cinnamon. She'd brought a tin of it for oatmeal, and somehow it ended up in everything from tea to toast. Customers commented on it. I didn't tell them why. One night, after closing, we sat on the couch with mugs of tea. The shop quiet except for the low hum of the heater. She leaned back against the cushions, watching the pendulum of a wall clock sway. "I like the quiet with you," she said softly. "It's not empty." I looked at her, the way her eyes lingered on mine, like she was making sure I'd heard her right. "I like it too," I said. She smiled, slow, deliberate, and then she leaned in. Her lips were warm, tasting faintly of cinnamon and tea. I kissed her back, steady as a clock coming into perfect beat. On a Saturday morning, Anna asked if I wanted to see where she'd been hiding lately. I thought she meant a coffee shop. Turned out she meant the library at her school. It smelled like paper and dust, the good kind. In a back room, she had a scanner set up next to a teetering stack of old ledgers. The walls were lined with boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Letters, 1880 to 1900. Journals, business records. She pulled a manila folder from one of the boxes and handed it to me. Inside were brittle photographs, a floor plan, and a yellowed newspaper clipping. "This," she said, tapping the photo of a brick building with a clockmaker's sign over the door, "is your shop." Or it was in 1887, Pocket Watchmakers Guild Hall, trained apprentices from all over the state. I stared at the picture. Same arched windows, same crooked gutter along the side. My father had never once mentioned it. Anna smiled faintly. "It's been everything since tailor, bakery, pawn shop. You're the first watch guy in there in nearly a century." I flipped through the rest of the file. The idea that I'd been working in a place built for exactly what I did now felt strange, like I'd stepped into a role someone had been saving for me. Before I could say much, the door swung open. A tall woman in a blazer strode in, eyes narrowing at the boxes. "Anna, we've talked about this. You're supposed to be aligning your work with the district's educational goals, not wasting time on nostalgic fluff." Anna didn't flinch. "It's called local history. Students connect better when they understand where they live." The woman gave a tight smile. "They connect better when they pass standardized tests. You do well to remember that." I stepped forward. "You realize she's preserving things no one else is bothering to touch? These stories are going to disappear if she doesn't do this." The woman's eyes flicked to me like I was a stray dog. "And you are? Someone who understands that some things are worth fixing." Anna's hand brushed my arm, a silent don't. She looked at the woman and said, calm as a clock, "Some things are worth fighting for, even if no one else sees it." The woman huffed, muttered something about priorities, and left. Anna went back to her desk like nothing had happened, sliding the file toward me again. "So, want to read about the watchmaker who ran your place into the ground in 1892? I pulled up a chair. "Yeah, I do." By the next weekend, I was hauling my toolbox into a dusty storage room at her school. The door hinges screamed when I opened it, like the place was protesting being disturbed. "This is it," Anna said, flipping on a dim overhead bulb. "The future archive. Right now it's just an archaeological dig of bad filing decisions." Stacks of boxes leaned like drunk dominoes. A dead fan sat in the corner, choked in cobwebs. I looked up at the single bulb. "First thing, lighting." "You can't preserve history in the dark," she grinned. "That's why you're here." It became our project. Saturdays and some evenings after I closed the shop, I'd bring in tools, she'd bring in sandwiches or soup. I mounted bright LED strips along the ceiling, while she sorted through letters, photos, and yearbooks. Every so often she'd read something out loud, love notes from the 1920s, a mayor's angry letter about rowdy dancing, a grocery list scribbled on the back of a church program. "You know," I said one night while wiring the last light, "half these stories are too good to stay in boxes." "That's the idea," she said, sliding a stack of photographs into a labeled folder. It didn't take long for word to spread. A couple of teachers wandered in one afternoon, curious about the light spilling under the door. By the end of the week, there was a small crowd on lunch breaks, flipping through old photos, and asking Anna about the town's founders. The same administrator who'd scolded her before showed up at a school board meeting a month later, and called it an innovative, community-driven approach to student engagement. Anna told me about it afterward with a straight face, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. "She's taking credit for your work," I said. "She's letting me keep doing it," Anna replied. "I'll take the trade." I looked around the room we'd built together, the bright lights, the neat rows of labeled boxes, the open table where people could actually sit and read. It wasn't just a storage room anymore. Anna wasn't just preserving history. She was giving people a reason to remember and a place to connect while they did it. By early spring, the air had that edge where you could almost believe winter was done. Anna and I were closing up the archive one Saturday when she lingered by the door, her keys in her hand. "My lease is up in June," she said. "I haven't decided if I'm renewing." I leaned against the door frame. "You thinking about moving?" Her thumb worried the metal keyring. "I don't know. The place is fine, but—" She stopped, like the rest of the sentence would give too much away. I knew that pause. I'd lived inside it for years, when you want to ask for something, but you're not sure if the other person will flinch. I could have let it slide. Instead, I said, "There's space here, if you want it." Her eyes lifted to mine. "Upstairs?" "Upstairs. Downstairs. Whatever you need." She smiled, slow and certain, and reached into her bag. "Then you should have this." It was a small vintage key, the kind that once wound old clocks. Our initials were etched into the bow, L.A. and A.M., in neat script. "For us," she said, "a life we can build together." I turned it over in my hand. The brass was warm from her pocket, the teeth worn smooth with time. "You planned this." "Only if you said yes." We ended up on the shop rooftop that night, a bottle of red between us, the town spread out in blinking pockets of light. The bar below sent up a muffled thrum of bass. The clocks in the window behind us ticked in uneven chorus. I held up my glass. To not letting the good things gather dust. She clinked hers against mine, and to keeping them running. The wind off the street was cool, but she stayed close, her shoulder pressed into mine. Below us, the town moved on in its own rhythm. Above, all I could hear was her breathing, steady as the beat of a clock I'd never want to stop. The day marked exactly 1 year since she'd walked into my shop, soaked to the bone, dragging that grandfather clock behind her. I closed up early, flipped the sign, and locked the door. Anna was waiting by the curb with a woven picnic basket and that look that meant she'd already decided where we were going. "River," she said. "Come on." We walked down through the side streets until the storefronts gave way to open sky and the slow bend of the water. She spread a blanket on the grass, unpacked bread, cheese, a thermos of coffee. The late afternoon light caught in her hair, and for a second I could hear the faint hum of my father's old shop clock in my head, steady and certain. As we ate, she leaned back on her hands, watching the water. "It's strange," she said. "The moment my clock broke was the first time I felt time start again." I set my cup down, and I finally understood what it means to keep something going, not just fix it. She smiled, but it wasn't just about the words. It was the weight behind them, the months of shared mornings, repairs both small and quiet, the sound of her voice, mixing with the ticking downstairs. A barge moved slow along the far bank. The city lights were starting to blink on behind us. We didn't talk after that. We just sat, shoulders touching, listening to the river carry whatever it wanted away, leaving the rest of it, everything worth holding, right there between us.